Hi, everyone. My guest today is Michael Branton. Michael is a partner at Conviser Property Group. He's been in commercial real estate for more than 17 years now and totaled more than $160 million worth of transactions. He started off at Key Point Partners and moved to CPG about 2 years ago. He also co-founded New England Retail Dealmakers. And this is the part that I love the most about your profile on LinkedIn. He defines himself as a retail matchmaker and an espresso enthusiast. You're going to have to back that up with an Italian in a few seconds. Michael, are you
Gladly.
ready to talk tech in CRE?
Yeah, let's get into it.
That's
Thanks so much
amazing.
for having me, Pietro.
Thank you for coming on. So let's start from the beginning. How did you get into commercial real estate?
Okay, so great question. I moved to Boston almost right out of college. I think my diploma was still, the ink was still drying. Came up here without a job. Came up here because some friends of mine thought it would be a great idea. Um, I went along with it. I found a job at a residential real estate company.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Started working there. I'd worked in titles and appraisals for JP Morgan Chase before that, so I
Mm-hmm.
was already hooked on the real estate game. But as it turns out, 2.5 years later, I wasn't a particularly great residential broker. I didn't like the timing of it. I didn't like working evenings, nights, weekends, Saturday, Sunday. But I
Mm-hmm.
also didn't particularly subscribe to the emotional piece to it. Commercial real estate is very data driven. It's very math based, demographic based. There's a lot more science to it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas painting somebody's lifestyle choices to live in a brownstone was just not my forte. But what I did discover in that was I was really good at selling neighborhoods. I was really good at giving somebody a sense of their lifestyle in a particular neighborhood, whether it was the Fenway or the Seaport was emerging at the time, the Back Bay where my office was at the time. And I found myself talking about stores, restaurants, things to do, etc. And I thought to myself, I want to stay in real estate. There has got to be a better way.
Got
Somebody's
it.
got to do that. So I reverse engineered it. I discovered that there were a lot of people that did what I currently
Mm-hmm.
do. And I'm pretty sure I called all of them.
Got it. And you landed the job at Key Point Partners,
I
right?
did. Yeah, I
Got
did.
it.
And I started there in 2006. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess in the span of when the market was interesting, it was, in some respects similar market to what it is today, feeding frenzy for good spaces
Mm-hmm.
and tenants are chasing deals um and then sort of 2008 kicked in and things got interesting.
Got it. Yeah. And I've seen you went from an entry position to being a vice president there. What I would like to understand, when we talk about past experiences, we always talk about what we did, but the actually interesting thing is what we learned. So what would you say
Sure.
was your main learning from Key Point?
Oh, well, so they're a pretty dominant third-party service provider, do a lot of asset management, property management for large institutional clients. And, the big learning curve for me was, yeah, I learned how to do transactions and represent landlords and subsequently represent tenants, but I
Mm-hmm.
got a real good look at basically everything that went under the hood of making a property run, building out a space, managing a lease, dealing with the life cycle of any tenancy from that because they're a vertically integrated company and I got to see all of the different layers. So that was a super helpful thing for me in terms of my progression and better understanding the process and I think informed some of my abilities now to do deals, understand landlords' perspectives,
Mm-hmm.
the nuances, and then subsequently better help and represent the tenants that I work with today.
Yeah, yeah. And what are you focused on? Is it more tenant rep or still doing both tenant and landlord rep?
I started out my career probably the first 10 years doing predominantly landlord representation, shopping centers, urban storefronts, and then kind of the last seven, I morphed into most of my book of business is tenant representation work. And I would say now it is almost 90%. I do a lot of work in the medtail space, medical tenants looking
Mm-hmm.
for retail space,
Mm-hmm.
entertainment, with a movie theater client I've worked with for some time, and then fitness and restaurants. Those are sort of the sandboxes that I play in,
Yeah.
and it's been great.
I understand. Now, what I would like to understand is guide me through the decision of going from landlord rep to tenant rep, because I see a lot of brokers that are now choosing their career path and choosing what they want to work towards. What's your thinking behind it? Why did you make the choice to move towards tenant? And was it actually a choice that you made,
I
arbitrarily, or was it just happen?
I mean, I'd like to say that it was intentional and it was by design, but to some extent it found me. I'd certainly asked a lot of questions from my peers who specialized in tenant representation work and really never played in the landlord representation game. There are
Mm-hmm.
plenty of folks who do both and do it well, and that's great. Um, I would say I think after doing it for 10 plus years, just a new challenge to take on. One perspective of the landlord perspective or landlord representation game versus the tenant representation game is the difference between hunting and gathering.
Okay,
So when
interesting.
you're a landlord representation broker, you are hunting or you're gathering. You're looking for tenants that are the right fit. You're looking for who can add this, whether it's from a merchandise mix standpoint or um, somebody of a given size.
Mm-hmm.
And you're bringing them in. You're trying to compel them to want to do business with you and subsequently sign a lease. When you're a tenant advisor, you're hunting. You're looking for a very specific thing in a very specific place that meets the criteria of your client.
Mm-hmm.
And um, similar skill sets, different perspective.
Yeah,
And certainly some things are the same, but other things matter more to one side than another. And
I
it's it's
understand.
it's been it's been a good change. And the other anecdote that I'll throw out there is when you're a landlord broker, you need to know one market and you
Mm-hmm.
really need to know it well. When you're a tenant rep broker, you need to know all of them
Okay.
because you need to be a quick study and learn all of them. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a little bit of both, but they're definitely you know, the same coin but different sides.
Yeah. So would you say that it makes sense for the young broker watching this, or not even young, just the broker watching this and deciding what to do with their career, to just follow what they feel the most attracted to and the most interested in naturally, the side of the brokerage that they ask the more questions to, as you would put it?
Um, I think for every person there's a right fit. And a lot
Mm-hmm.
of it is there are plenty of brokerages, big and small, that play in both and do very well at it. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really the structure of the team that you're on and what kinds of accounts that you're presented with and what kind of opportunities. I mean, certainly there's a lot to be learned from both, and there's no downside risk in learning all of them at the same time and then kind of see
Yeah.
where that goes. As long as it's worth your time, it's worth your time.
I understand. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Last point that I would like to understand and talk about with you before we move to the technology side. You made a choice about 2 years ago to move from Keypoint to CPG. And in that choice, it's interesting because you went from almost boutique firm to really boutique firm.
Yep.
Can you guide me through that choice, and what would be your advice for anybody looking to make a career move like that?
Well, it's an interesting question you raise because it all boils down to fit and kind of what you want to do. And I felt as though most of the stuff that I was working on was more driven by tenant representation work. So I elected to go work at a company where that was more of what we were focused on.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because Keypoint is in perspective to CPG, is a much larger company and
Mm-hmm.
lots of great people. I think there are 80, 100 people, give or take, but there were two or three people in my department at any given time doing uh, project leasing and tenant representation. And so I went from a 2-person department to a 5-person department. So it's sort of an interesting reversal of going from a small department at a big company to um, a small department at a small company, but it's the only department. So, there it's all about fit, and it's all about where you're looking to grow your career. And certainly I learned so much working for the folks at Keypoint and wouldn't trade that for anything. And there are lots and lots of different companies that do really good work with lots of super talented brokers at all of them. And there's a lot to be learned just by sitting in a room and being a sponge and listening to people go about their day and how they do it.
Yeah, I completely agree with this. Now, moving to the side of technology, you've seen 2 decades of evolution, or right about that, now in commercial real estate. So I bet that you've seen a lot of different things happening in technology. And what I'd like to start from is, what would you say is the main way that you've seen technology impact your work?
Great question. So when I first started, I was given, well, actually, two anecdotes. One is I was given a stack of photos, and I was basically asked to pick out sort all the photos and sort of almost make a collage of a market and
Wait,
figure out.
what were they were photos of
They were
what
photos
exactly?
of retail stores.
Okay.
So, and I think it was all the retail stores in Harvard Square. And it's like, here's all the photos of all the stores in Harvard Square. Go make a collage. And this was to get to know the market intimately and to more or less make heads or tails of it. You would never do that now. And aerials were happening, and Google Earth was, I think, in its infancy at the time.
Yeah.
But you would never do that now because you have Google Street View and a handful of different resources to really help you not need to do that. And there are better things you could do. Did I learn from it? Absolutely. And then the second piece of it is there was a thing called the Retail Tenant Directory, which I
Okay.
think morphed into an online service over the past couple of years, but it was the size of an encyclopedia. And you'd go through it and you'd look for, let's say the director of real estate for, I'll use an extinct company, Borders, Books and Music. So you'd go in there and look for that person and call them. I don't even think it had email addresses in there. It had phone numbers. And you'd call them, but 50% of the time the person didn't work there.
Okay.
Because, like any other vocation, people are constantly evolving. They're moving from one company to another. So, but it was essentially a phone book for retail contacts. Now that stuff is almost done in real time. There are companies that are verifying that information, like my friends at Retail Sphere. And there are a bunch of other like kind services that do that, but that information's in real time. You're almost never getting somebody that doesn't work there anymore, or it's a dead end. So there's so much that is grown, running demographic reports and mapping reports and data analytics, which is very much your lane.
Yeah,
That
definitely.
stuff has grown so much and it's so amazing because there are companies that existed 15 plus years ago that did demographic analysis, and really it was kind of a black box. They came up with a report, they gave you a number and said, here's how we think this ranks. But there was never anything to it. So there was a lot of risk for your clients. And likewise, it was hard to understand. Whereas there's so much data out there now that, to some extent, you have to know your markets, you have to know your clients, you have to know what their needs are, but you also have to know how to read the information that's being presented to them and digest it, which is sort of an important attribute for someone like myself that's spending most of their day advising people on real estate decisions that will affect their operational sustainabilities.
Yeah, I've heard you or read on your posts on LinkedIn multiple times. You refer to, first of all, to tech tools as tech toys, which is best name ever. But I've heard you talk about the importance of using it as a competitive advantage, which I think is super
Absolutely.
interesting. I'd love to dig into that a bit. How do you go about, like, say that somebody's listening and they buy into this argument of technology becoming fundamental to being commercial real estate over the next few years. What would you say is the clear steps to start using technology to become a competitive advantage for you?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the first part about using technology as a competitive advantage is it's about time. So absent directories and resources, sure, you could, Google your way around the internet and find the right person, but that may take you 30 minutes, whereas a very basic service may take you 30 seconds. And so if you're able to reach 6 people in 30 minutes rather than reaching one, then, your time and your value is, I think it goes without saying. The second piece of it is that using data sources like cell phone data, in addition to traditional demographic reports and such, it gives you, you're already in the know. You have a better understanding of the given location, where people are coming from, that is, I think, more factually based than a traditional drive time. And that, as somebody who's we're in the information business, your ability to provide that information for your clients benefits them, benefits you subsequently. So it's hard to ignore the viability of tools out there. And I think, if anything, it's overload right now where there are so many. And some are better than others. And I think as long as you understand what it is that you're using, then I think it's all about the outcomes for your clients.
Yeah, interesting. So the framework that you use to look at it is, first of all, time and trying to look for these time savings. And secondly, looking at the information and trying to see if there is any key understanding of the market that you can add to your, let's say, knowledge book through using this type of data.
Yeah.
Got
I
it.
mean,
Super interesting.
the data is your toolbox. The tools, in order to help you save time and be more efficient, again, that's part of your, I call them tech toys. Some people refer to it as your tech stack. But I mean, these are the things, and the post you're referencing on LinkedIn, I put out some point last week. I think I left out a whole bunch of them too.
Yeah.
And there are so many of them, but they're so valuable so long as you use them and you're diligent about it.
Yeah, I completely understand. And of course, coming from a tech background, I definitely agree with what you're saying. I've seen that you do use a lot LinkedIn, and I'd love to know your thinking behind it. What's the idea?
I think LinkedIn is a great platform. And there are those that would argue that random people send you an invite and the first thing that they do is they want to sell you something. But if you ignore that and you ignore the political statements in there, it's a great way to connect with people to do business, or for people to know what your business does or how you could help them, or information that they may not have gleaned otherwise because they're not scheduled to go to a conference for another 60 to 90 days. And it's a way to connect. And the more connections you have, the better off you're going to be in a business that is really relationship driven. I can't really think of a business that's not relationship driven.
Yeah, definitely. But CRE in particular is very based on that, especially if you're doing tenant representation, where some of the work comes from relationships that you've been building and working on for a long time before it turns into an actual transaction. And I see you're posting quite actively. I see a lot of, I would say that using LinkedIn as a passive tool has become kind of the standard in the industry, just like every other standard. The change that I'm seeing now happen and I have a few names in mind, and that of brokers that are using it quite actively to post content and to be on top of mind of their connections, and try to become also a thought leader. Is that the way that you're looking at it as well?
It's certainly desirable, I think, in the long run. And I think rather than go from here to 100,
Yeah.
incremental steps, and I think really use it as a platform to show my personality. And I think it was Eddie Gonzalez, who's out of Arizona, said this: is if you see my content and it's not for you, then maybe I'm not the person you want to work with. So I'm trying to be authentic about it, trying to help people understand my personality. You touched on the espresso thing, and we can talk about that in a second, but it's a vehicle for people to know who I am and what I do. And um, I want it to be authentic because we start a relationship and you want to work with me, and I can help you find new locations for your business and help you scale.
Mm-hmm.
And you get in the car, and as it turns out, I'm not the person that you thought I was, or
Yeah.
turns out I'm a real big jerk. You're
Mm-hmm.
not going to want to do business with me. So I'd rather just be authentic, be genuine, be straightforward. And one of the things that I kind of stand for as a core value is I shoot straight.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you exactly what I think, um, even if it's not what you want to hear.
Yeah.
Because if I'm not telling you what I think, then then I'm just a car service and a tour guide, and I print stuff out for you and passively sit along in negotiating a deal for you. And that's not to your advantage.
Definitely, definitely. How long have you been posting actively on it?
I gotta say, I mean, certainly I've ticked that up over the past, I would say early on in the pandemic. I kind of realized that it was a great tool because everyone was locked up in a closet and sitting in front of a computer.
Mm-hmm.
But I think slightly before that, I became aware of both LinkedIn and using Instagram, and I continue to flirt with what I can do on TikTok.
Yeah.
Whether or
Yeah.
not that gets cut off by the US government is a whole other story, but certainly not within my control. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
a platform for putting your message out there and showing people what you do and what you're up to.
Yeah, I understand. So basically, it's been quite some time that you've been posting on there. So the thing that I guess I'd be curious to know if I was a broker is, have you been able over the last year or two to already see a concrete impact from the work that you do on social? Because I mean, at the end of the day, it is time consuming and it takes time. I read the article that you wrote about having a plan and the story about your daughter, and those things, they take time to
They do.
create and to generate. So it requires an investment from the side of the person working on it. The question is, have you seen any concrete return on investment until now, or do you think it's still too early on in the game and you're just building awareness?
Well, I can start with the lowest hanging fruit. That's how you found me, so it must work.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
mean, the second one is plenty of people I meet at shows or otherwise, they know who I am before I meet with them,
Mm-hmm.
and that's worth the paper it's printed on. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have to do nearly as much legwork to help them understand a given value proposition if they already know who I am before we've met.
Yeah.
And then second of all is people do research. And a client some time ago had said, "Oh yeah, I found all your stuff on social media. You're the real deal. Let's get to work."
Yeah.
That works for me. I can't say I mean, prospecting on social media is a game changer. And if you're not doing it, why not?
Mm-hmm.
You're scrolling it anyways. You might as well be trying to, push some outcomes there. But it's an effective tool, and certainly there are brokers of many different industries and verticals that are not leveraging social media, and that's okay.
Hmm.
If they don't want to put in the time and they don't want to put themselves out there, I understand it's not for everybody, but
Yeah.
I found it to be both fulfilling and useful.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing your experience with it.
Sure.
What I'd be curious to know is, are you seeing any trends, even outside of technology, just any trends in terms of types of transactions and things that are happening, both on the landlord and tenant rep side, that you think are interesting and that you would like to share?
I think that the trend that I've seen over the past multiple years is it was very difficult early on for certain types of uses to be in shopping centers and to be in traditional retail.
For
And
example?
I mean, I do a lot with medical offices. Medical offices were restricted.
Hmm.
Entertainment uses were restricted. Um, Fitness uses were restricted. And now those uses are, landlords are trying to cultivate them for a
Hmm.
number of different reasons, whether they're Amazon proof or internet resistant or the default rates are low. There are plenty of different reasons why, but
Hmm.
and I understand the genesis of it was from certain more powerful or controlling retailers who wanted to protect parking and parking spaces and so forth. And I think what they found over the long term is that no, there was plenty of cross shopping that happened as the result of these uses being in shopping centers.
Yeah.
I think what is continuing to progress that I love both as a retail broker, but also as a consumer is the amount of restaurants being cultivated for developments and a lot of really, really concerted thought going into how can we put more restaurants into a given property.
Hmm.
And they're looking
Interesting.
for unique restaurants, local restaurants, chef-driven concepts, independent coffee shops and things like that. Really a somewhat of a departure, but it's more of an evolution from trying to get the highest bang for your buck and the highest credit tenant because in the end, uniqueness is what drives traffic and increases trips.
Yeah.
And
Do
there's
you
a
think it's
cost
a,
benefit to credit versus cool.
yeah.
That's not my expression, credit versus cool. I'm not sure who it is. I'm going to say it's Spencer Levy's, but it's 100% spot on.
Okay, got it. But I completely agree with you. What I'd be curious to understand is, so basically the decision is purely made on the basis of who's going to drive the most traffic, right? So the fact
Yeah,
that they're opening
like
up
it
to,
at its core is
yeah.
who's going to drive the most traffic. And
Hmm.
to some extent, you have to make a then decision, but and maybe it's sort of a sea change. The pandemic, e-commerce, the halo effect of where if you open a store in a given market, your online sales also blossom.
Hmm.
And then retailers loosening up restrictions to allow for a larger diversity of uses and more food, more entertainment, more fitness, and frankly, those three categories I think were the three that recovered the fastest in the once everybody came out of lockdown.
Yeah, yeah. They're also the ones that have a natural physical presence to them. So it makes the
Correct.
most sense for people that are looking for those experiences to get out of their houses and go back to the centers. Super interesting.
Agreed.
One last quick question before we go into the quick fire part. So where do you see the industry and in particular retail real estate going and heading towards in the next 18 to 24 months?
I mean, I think the supply chain issues and labor issues and cost of construction issues, I'm not an economist, and they've certainly talked about those ad nauseum, but I think there's still a lot of growth, and
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's still a big pipeline of retail tenants looking to open stores.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Okay,
maybe
interesting.
retail is one of those asset classes where we find out 6 months late that we're in a recession, perhaps, but there's still people are growing. People are looking for spaces. The phone continues to ring for the few listings that I have, and
Mm-hmm.
tenants looking to open up and take on more market share. I mean, that
Yeah.
just tells me that not so much that the market's underserved or overbuilt, but there's just a lot of demand from people who see the value in being in the physical marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with this view of the market. It's really hard to understand, exactly what it's gonna head towards and what it's going to be looking like in a few months or a few years. But I completely agree with the fact that that's the way where we're going, and the hunger is still there from the retailer side and from the tenant side. So four quick questions. First of all, favorite business book?
Ooh, like a sales book?
Well, business in general. You can also choose to take the business out and just go favorite
Um,
book.
I love Never Split the Difference.
Lovely, lovely, great
Um,
book.
Great book. Taught me as much about parenting as it did sales.
Yeah, it is all about negotiation at the end of
It's all
the
about negotiation, and
day.
kids are the best negotiators I know.
Definitely, definitely.
Ruthless.
Yeah, always. Second question, what is a transactional project that you worked on in your career that you're the most proud of?
Most proud. I think, one of my clients, 42 North Dental, I started working with them when they had, I think, 29 offices,
Mm-hmm.
and now they have north of 100. Now,
Mm-hmm.
granted, I wish I could say that I did all of them. I probably did 30 new offices for them, but just to see a client's trajectory and growth, and now they're growing even beyond New England is it's a great thing. Other times it's been independent operators who, this is a small business for them, and this is the beginning and the end, and to see them either start up a new business and do well or open a new
Yeah,
location, it's really rewarding
yeah.
because you get to see the impact that that has for your clients.
That's beautiful. Third question, what is a piece of advice that you would give your 20-year-old self?
Network like your life depended on it.
Beautiful. I love that.
And I mean, it does actually. If you're in an external role, sales, or certain ends of the business, you have to be in front of people. And I
Mm-hmm.
like to say there's rarely is there a networking event that I didn't like,
Mm-hmm.
but go to everything you possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
Meet
Mm-hmm.
anyone you possibly can. You don't know where your next deal is going to come from, but much like the Wayne Gretzky quote of, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take,
Right.
is if
Yeah.
you don't go to a networking meeting, you've already shut the door on meeting somebody that could either help you or you could help, or better yet, you could help them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Alvin, we say you miss 100% of the predictions you never make.
Also true.
I completely agree with that statement. That's a great piece of advice. Last question: who is a retail real estate powerhouse that we absolutely, definitely need to have as a guest?
Oh my God. There are so many.
Or you can give multiple. You can give more than one.
I would certainly connect with Beth Azor. I would
Mm-hmm.
certainly encourage you to connect with Jay Ciano
Mm-hmm.
and Corey Zelnick from Zelnick and Company. And then I'm blanking on it. There are so many great retail real estate professionals out there. Um, a company out of the West Coast that I'm blanking on that I'll email you after the fact. They just think differently
Yep.
and have such a sort of abundant mindset about the business. And there's a lot we can learn from everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing those names. I completely agree with the fact that there is a lot of talent in retail and commercial real estate, and it's not celebrated a lot. It's not a super sexy industry, and this is kind of what we want to change. We want to start listening to those talented people like you and start understanding a bit better how you think and sharing with the next generations.
Well, I will say this. I mean,
Yep.
ICSC has done and is doing a lot of groundwork in terms of reaching out to schools and universities and getting, soon to be graduates in the know that this industry exists.
Yeah.
Because for so long it didn't really have there was no red carpet. It was insulated and it was sort of an unknown. You had to know somebody that already worked in it. So I think they're taking the veil off that, and I think that can only increase both the makeup of the business, the colors of the people that work in the business, but make it look like the demographic that we serve, which is pretty much everybody.
Yeah, it's fundamental. Well, thanks a lot for your time. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate it. And I hope to do this again soon.
Likewise. Thanks, Pietro.
Thank you.